Have you ever wondered why a man only begins to truly see her when she starts to disappear? When her voice no longer fills the space with warmth, when her eyes no longer search for him in a crowded room, when her energy, once wrapped around him like an invisible fire, begins to retreat into silence, something inside him trembles. Not love, not guilt, but ego. Fragile, inflated, hollow, begins to crack. Because you see, a woman's energy is not merely affection. It is psychic fuel. It is the unspoken permission for a man to see himself through her admiration, to believe in his own myth through her gaze. For many men, her presence becomes the mirror through which they identify their worth, their masculinity, their place in the world. And when that mirror shatters, when the reflection of his greatness no longer dances in her eyes, he begins to feel the abyss he was trying to avoid all along, himself. This is not about the man who has done the inner work, who has wrestled his shadows and stood alone in his own emptiness without fear. No, this is about the one who needed her to be the balm for his wounds, the scaffolding for his crumbling self-concept, the one who projected his unresolved mother complex onto her nurturing, who confused her empathy with servitude, her patience with permanence, and her devotion with duty. And she felt it. She didn't know at first what she was sensing. But something began to drain her. Something subtle. It wasn't overt neglect or cruelty. It was the slow erosion of reciprocity, the invisible transaction where she gave and gave, not just time or words or affection, but life force. Her intuitive knowing, her grounding presence, her quiet tending to the emotional landscape between them. And he took it as a given. At first she thought this was love, that to give without measure was a form of spiritual strength, that to be needed was a kind of validation. But over time, something inside her began to stir, a quiet rebellion, a question that echoed late at night. What about me? This is the threshold of individuation. Carl Jung spoke of it not just as a process of psychological development, but as a spiritual awakening. The moment when a woman begins to separate her identity from the roles she plays, the lover, the caregiver, the muse. When she stops performing the script written by his unconscious needs and begins to write her own. Withdrawing energy does not always look like leaving. Sometimes it is simply a detachment of the soul, a closing of the emotional tap, a refusal to be the sponge for another's unprocessed emotions. And though she may still sit beside him, something in the atmosphere shifts. The psychic umbilical cord is cut. The silence grows heavier, not with resentment, but with truth. And the man feels it, like cold air in a once warm room. He does not understand at first. He asks, "Are you okay?" Not because he cares, but because he feels her slipping. He does not want to lose her, but more accurately, he does not want to lose what she gives him, the illusion of wholeness. Here lies the collapse of the ego, not the sacred self, but the performative self, the part of him that was built on her belief in him. And without her energy to sustain it, he begins to confront the parts of himself he buried long ago. His insecurity, his emotional dependence, his shame. The mask falls, and underneath it a man not yet whole. You, the woman watching this, you must know the power you hold when you begin to reclaim your energy, when you stop offering your emotional labor as currency for love, when you remember that being deeply intuitive does not mean you must absorb the pain of those who refuse to heal. That being feminine does not mean being formless for the sake of his comfort. There is nothing more unsettling to the fragile masculine than a woman who no longer revolves around him. A woman who no longer explains herself, no longer softens the truth, no longer trades her radiance for scraps of attention. He will call it cold. He will call it distant. But it is neither. It is clarity. It is self-possession. It is the return to her center. And as she rises, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in quiet, embodied sovereignty, the man must choose. To evolve or to retreat, to do the shadow work, or to seek another mirror to hide in. Because the woman who withdraws her energy is not punishing him, she is remembering herself. He may try to draw her back, not with apology but with confusion, with a sudden burst of attention, with words that mimic understanding but carry no transformation. He might say, "You've changed." And in a way he's right. But what he fails to grasp is that this change was not sudden. It was born of 1,000 small wounds she chose not to speak of, 1,000 compromises that slowly bled her dry. When a woman withdraws her energy, it is not impulsive. It is tectonic. It is the slow, subterranean shift of a soul reclaiming its boundaries. She is no longer reacting. She is remembering. She is no longer explaining. She is embodying. The girl in her that once needed to be chosen has now stepped aside for the woman who chooses herself. And this is where the deeper Jungian unraveling begins. Because what she's withdrawing is not just attention, it is anima. In Jungian terms, anima is the feminine psychological component within the male psyche. It is the bridge between his conscious identity and the depths of his unconscious soul. When a man is in a relationship with a woman, especially one who embodies emotional depth, he unconsciously projects his anima onto her. She becomes the vessel through which he accesses feeling, intuition, relatedness. She becomes the symbol of his inner world. So when she pulls away, energetically, emotionally, spiritually, he experiences it as more than rejection. He experiences it as a kind of psychic death. The anima withdraws, and with it, his access to meaning, softness, wholeness. That's why he doesn't just miss her, he feels lost, unmoored, as if something inside him has collapsed that he can't name. But here's the truth. What collapses was never her. It was the illusion that she was his emotional home. He now stands at a crossroads. One path leads back into the familiar, chasing another reflection, another woman to wear the mask of his anima and soothe his aching ego. The other path leads inward, into the dark forest of shadow work, into the confrontation with his projections, his mother wounds, his emotional immaturity. It is the lonelier road, the quieter one. The one that offers no applause, no quick reward, only truth. Few choose it, most fear it. Because to walk that path is to dismantle the very foundation of who he thought he was. It is to admit that love was never about her. It was about how she made him feel about himself, that he never truly saw her. He only saw the parts of her that mirrored back his needs. But for the woman, this moment is sacred. This is where she begins to feel the returning pulse of her own vitality. No longer siphoned into someone else's story, she turns inward, not to hide but to reconnect. She may grieve, she may ache. There is no withdrawal without a reckoning. But even in that grief, there is power. Because it is her grief, not his. Her journey, not theirs. She is no longer performing resilience, she is becoming it. And as she begins to center herself in her own narrative, something profound happens. Her clarity sharpens. She no longer confuses emotional labor with intimacy. She no longer entertains potential over reality. She no longer tries to fix what was never hers to repair. She begins to speak less, not out of silence, but out of sovereignty. She no longer needs to explain her boundaries, justify her distance, or make him understand. She knows that energy speaks louder than words, and hers has already said everything it needed to. This is the individuation Jung wrote of, the sacred task of becoming whole unto oneself. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but integrated. When a woman reaches this place, she no longer seeks to be chosen by a man who hasn't chosen himself. She no longer gives her light to those who live in shadows and resent the sun. You, listening now, perhaps you've felt the stirrings of this withdrawal within you. Perhaps you've questioned yourself, doubted your worth, wondered if you're being too much or not enough. But hear this. You are not too much. You were just giving too much to someone who was not built to receive it with reverence. You are not cold. You are healing. You are not cruel. You are clear. Let him feel the absence. Let him sit in the silence where your voice used to fill the air. Let him reckon with the mirror he once mistook for love. It is not your responsibility to rescue a man from the reckoning his own soul demands. You are not here to carry him home. You are here to come home to yourself. And as she continues her return inward, what emerges is not bitterness, but discernment. A fierce, quiet knowing. She no longer confuses attention with intimacy, charm with depth, desire with devotion. She has seen what it means to be worshipped one moment and abandoned the next. She has learned that a man who cannot hold space for her silence does not deserve her song. This is the alchemy of withdrawal, not a retreat into coldness, but a reclamation of warmth, reserved only for what nourishes her. She begins to recognize how much of her fire was spent warming those who never intended to stay, and so she stops giving, not out of spite, but from truth. For the masculine ego, this is where the real dismantling begins. Because ego thrives on certainty, on access, on control. When she was predictable, emotionally available, always ready to soothe or engage or respond, he knew how to play the game. But now her energy is no longer accessible on demand. Now he must confront a version of himself that no longer evokes a reaction from her. And it haunts him. He doesn't miss her, not entirely. He misses who he was when she adored him. He misses the self-image her devotion made possible. Without her energy to orbit, he begins to spiral inward and finds there is nothing solid at the center. This is where the shadow awakens. The very aspects of himself he has spent a lifetime avoiding, insecurity, dependence, emotional volatility, fear of abandonment, begin to rise like ghosts. Jung knew this well. The shadow does not disappear when denied. It festers, it controls, it projects. And when no one else is left to carry the projection, it turns inward and begins to devour. Some men at this point implode. They lash out, not at her perhaps, but at the world. They chase distractions, drown in numbing habits, seek new women to resurrect the illusion of emotional wholeness. But it's never quite the same. Because once he's felt the withdrawal of a conscious woman, once he's been exiled from the radiant field of her intuitive knowing, every other connection feels dim by comparison. Because what she offered wasn't just affection, it was presence, a kind of spiritual hospitality. She made room for all of him, his chaos, his silence, his hunger to be seen. But in doing so, she betrayed herself, and now she no longer plays that role. She has stepped out of the archetype of the healer, mother, lover. She is not a salve, she is not a mirror, she is not the therapist he never paid. She is woman, whole, complex, evolving, and her energy is no longer currency for his unexamined pain. You listening, perhaps you feel the ache of this moment, the grief of pulling away from someone who never truly met you, the guilt of reclaiming what was always yours, and maybe, beneath that, a flicker of fear. Will I ever be loved this way again? But what you fear losing was never love. It was familiarity, codependency dressed as connection. And you are not here to settle for proximity that costs you your peace. There is a strength that comes only when you stop needing to be understood by someone incapable of understanding themselves. A serenity that dawns when you no longer argue for your value, when you no longer plead for reciprocity, when you realize that the most radical thing you can do is walk away. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started. This is where the alchemical woman is born. Not hardened, not numb, but sovereign. She does not withhold to punish. She withdraws to protect. Her silence is not a weapon, it is sanctuary. And as she continues her path inward, she begins to see men more clearly. Not as enemies, not as saviors, but as humans, fractured like herself. Some still drowning in projection, some quietly awakening, some capable of meeting her in the space beyond ego, beyond shadow, beyond fantasy. But until then, she does not wait. She creates, she heals, she cultivates joy in the absence of performance. She becomes the very love she once begged for. She learns that solitude is not the absence of connection, it is the birthplace of self-respect. He may return. Many do. Not out of readiness but nostalgia. But she will not be the same woman he remembers, and he will sense it. The way her eyes no longer flicker in hope when he speaks. The way her body no longer leans forward, hungry for approval. The way she simply exists, full, radiant, unmoved. In that moment, he will feel the full weight of what he lost. Not her, but access to the divine through her. She no longer dances to the rhythm of his uncertainty. She no longer holds space for his delayed epiphanies. Because what he mistook for patience was her inner war, a quiet, agonizing delay of her own awakening. And now there is no going back. He may try to spark the old dynamic. The charm returns. The words that once disarmed her, soft apologies, tearful promises, the language of a man who knows how to say everything except what he truly feels. But she hears differently now, not with her ears, but with her body. Her intuition has grown sharp in the silence. Her nervous system, once constantly and alerting for emotional breadcrumbs, has found stillness. Peace is now her baseline, and anything less feels like poison. He says, let's start over. But she already has, because something sacred happened in the space after her withdrawal. In the emptiness where his validation once lived, she discovered a deeper well, one that he never reached. Her self-worth, no longer fed by the approval of a man lost in his own fragmentation, began to take root in something ancient, something sovereign, something silent. She began to remember the archetypal power of the feminine, not in relation to man, but in relation to soul. The wild woman, the mystic, the empress, the healer who heals herself, the lover whose first romance is with her own becoming. She saw how the world had trained her to nurture before she was nurtured, to give before she received, to pour endlessly into men who only brought their thirst. But she is no longer a well for the emotionally dehydrated. She is a fire. She is a mirror. She is the test. And the man, should he rise, must now earn what was once freely given. Not through grand gestures or poetic apologies, but through presence, through consistency, through the slow, humble labor of becoming whole on his own. He must stand naked before the shadow she once absorbed and love it into integration. Not for her, for himself. Until then, her energy remains hers, unleashed in her craft, her sisterhood, her art, her solitude. She is not waiting. She is blooming. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Who looks outside, dreams, who looks inside, awakes. And she has awakened. Her clarity is not rage, it is resurrection. There is a quiet revolution that occurs when a woman no longer abandons herself for the illusion of connection. When she no longer tries to earn love through labor, through fixing, through being easy to love. She no longer wants to be easy. She wants to be real. And the man who cannot meet her there, who cannot meet himself there, will find her gone. Not physically, perhaps, but the woman he once knew, the one who bent, who waited, who watered their bond with her own depletion, no longer lives here. You, the one listening, you may be standing at this threshold, your hands trembling, your voice still soft from years of silencing it. But within you burns the same fire, the same inheritance, the same unbreakable knowing that your energy is sacred, that to give it without reverence is a betrayal of the divine. Let this be your reckoning. Let this be your return. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to explain your absence. The vibration of your energy withdrawn echoes louder than any words you could ever speak. Because when a woman stops pouring into someone who refuses to become a vessel, when she stops sacrificing her peace to sustain another's illusion, when she stops mistaking obligation for love, that is when she becomes untouchable. He will remember her, not as the woman who left, but as the one whose absence revealed who he truly was. And maybe, if the ego crumbles enough, if the silence pierces deep enough, if the anima retreats far enough, he might begin his own journey, not to win her back, but to finally meet himself. And in that sacred space of absence, where she no longer anchors him with her gaze, nor holds him in her emotional gravity, a quiet truth takes form, one he cannot outrun. She was never his to possess, only to witness. Her love was not a transaction. It was a revelation. But revelations demand reverence, and he brought his ego into a temple meant for soul. What crumbles now is not just his pride, but the scaffolding of every illusion he built on her softness. He may wander through memory, chasing echoes of her laughter, flashes of her fire, forgetting that it was not her presence that made him feel whole, but her belief in his wholeness. A belief he never truly earned. Now, stripped of her faith, he stands before himself, naked in the mirror she once held up to his soul. And here, the deeper masculine pain reveals itself. Not just loss, but exposure. Without her energy to cloak his shadows, they rise with clarity. His boyhood wounds, long dormant, now scream for tending. The mother wound, the fear of failure, the hunger for unconditional affirmation without the labor of self-awareness. She had once absorbed it all, without even knowing, until her body began to rebel. You see, the body always knows. Before her mind could name it, before her heart could admit it, her nervous system had already begun to contract. The fatigue, the restlessness, the quiet grief that clung to her even in moments of joy. These were not symptoms of love. They were signs of imbalance. Her soul was dimming, not because she loved too much, but because she gave without return, without recognition, without rest. But now, in her withdrawal, her body breathes again. Her heart, no longer racing in anticipation of emotional volatility, finds rhythm. Her intuition, no longer muffled by confusion, begins to roar. And she remembers, love is not martyrdom. Love is not emotional servitude. Love is not the art of making oneself smaller so someone else can feel big. She rises, not as an act of vengeance, but of return to herself. Her energy now coils inward, not out of bitterness, but because she knows its power. She no longer spills it recklessly. She pours it into her evolution, into her dreams, into the soil of her becoming. He, watching from the ruins of what once felt secure, begins to understand the magnitude of what he lost. He begins to ask questions, not of her, but of himself. Why did I need her to mother me? Why did I expect her to hold space for pain I refused to name? Why did I only value her in absence? These are questions no woman can answer for him. This is the crucible of true masculinity, not domination, not charm, but self-confrontation. The raw, unglamorous process of tearing down the false self to unearth the inner king. The king who does not need her light to feel whole, but who has found his own, and can stand beside her, not above, not beneath. And yet, this journey is not hers to wait on, because she is not a pause in his story. She is the catalyst for his transformation. Whether he chooses to rise or remain in pieces is no longer her concern. This is the sacred detachment the empowered feminine learns. Not everything that breaks in her presence must be healed by her hands. She walks forward now, untethered from the role of emotional caretaker. And as she does, life begins to meet her differently. Opportunities open, people respond to her with new eyes. The universe, once silent in her stuckness, begins to whisper again. Because when a woman reclaims her energy, the world rearranges around her. And the man, if he watches long enough, may come to understand a final, brutal truth. She did not leave him. He left himself, long before she ever walked away. And it was her departure that illuminated just how far he had drifted from his own center. Some men use this realization to finally awaken. Others use it to resent her freedom. But for her, none of that matters anymore. She no longer lives in the echoes of someone else's unfinished work. She no longer orients her worth around who chooses her or regrets losing her. Her life is no longer a reaction. It is a creation. You listening, you know what this feels like. The ache, the awakening, the sacred rage, and the deep calm that follows. You are not alone in it. Millions of women are rising with you, choosing themselves over illusion, choosing solitude over servitude, choosing soul over story. You are not abandoning love. You are becoming it. And as you walk forward, know this. The man who is meant for your energy will not confuse it with supply. He will recognize it as sacred. He will come not to consume, but to contribute. Not to be healed, but to meet you whole. And now, as the final layer of this sacred unraveling unfolds, she no longer looks back, not because the memory has faded, but because her vision has sharpened. What once seemed like love was often a projection, his anima clinging to her womb of warmth, craving her light not as a partner, but as a refuge from his own darkness. She was not truly seen. She was used, even if unconsciously, as a symbol of the inner feminine he refused to meet within himself. And Carl Jung, in all his timeless clarity, named this: when a man denies his anima, he chases it in the outer world, endlessly seeking women to complete what he has abandoned inside. But no woman can carry that burden forever. It crushes her. It silences her. It splits her into roles: mother, savior, muse, until she forgets she was never meant to be anything but whole. So when she withdrew, it was not just from him, it was from the archetype he had placed upon her. She tore down the pedestal, not out of cruelty but out of truth. She would no longer serve a man's fantasy while starving her own soul. And this is where true power is born. It's not loud, it's not performative. It's not revenge dressed in red lips and cold shoulders. It is quiet, grounded, relentless. It is the power of self-possession, the power of knowing that your energy is not a gift to be bartered. It is a force to be revered. She moves through the world differently now, not guarded, just discerning, not hard, just clear. She can still open, still love, still surrender, but only where it is safe to do so, only where it is honored. Her intuition has become her compass. Her nervous system, once hijacked by inconsistency and emotional hunger, is now a sacred altar. If it tightens, she listens. If it settles, she leans in. She no longer negotiates with confusion. She no longer entertains maybes from men who treat her as optional. Because she has learned, confusion is not chemistry. Chaos is not passion. A man who loves you will not keep you guessing. And so the old story ends. The story where she overfunctions just to feel worthy. The story where she waits for crumbs and calls it loyalty. The story where she bends, shapeshifts, sacrifices her own rhythm to keep a connection alive. Now she writes a new one, a story of embodiment, of fierce standards, of radiant solitude, of trusting the loss, even when it breaks her open. Because some things must shatter for truth to emerge. And to the man watching from the distance of her departure, there is still a choice. He can spiral deeper into resentment, mistaking her freedom for betrayal. He can seek another to wear her mask, to relive the illusion, only to be haunted again by the original loss. Or he can begin the work, the deep, ruthless, honest work of facing himself. If he is brave, he will descend into the shadow, the shame, the silence. He will stop blaming women for his fragmentation and start tending the boy within who was never taught how to hold the sacred feminine without grasping at it. And maybe, in that descent, he will finally rise, not as the man she once begged him to become, but as the man he was always meant to be. Still, she does not wait. Her life moves forward like a river, sovereign, alive, untamed. And in its current, she finds peace, not perfection, not constant joy, but peace, the kind that comes from alignment, the kind that comes from no longer betraying yourself to be chosen. She now belongs to herself, and that changes everything. To the woman listening, remember this: you are not too much. You were simply giving too much to someone who offered too little. You are not intimidating. You are just standing in your truth. You are not hard to love. You are hard to manipulate. And to the man listening, let her absence teach you. Let it humble you. Let it guide you inward. Not to win her back, but to meet the parts of yourself she could never touch because they were yours alone to hold. The woman who walks away is not cold. She is courageous. She is not punishing you. She is protecting herself. And if you ever want to stand beside her again, you must arrive with more than regret. You must arrive as a mirror of her wholeness. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.